Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Vandana Shiva. Your insights will be invaluable to understanding how we can rebuild our lives in the post-COVID-19 era. Before we begin, could you briefly explain to our Korean audience what the COVID-19 situation is in India?
When the crisis started, India had extremely few infections. And the few that came were actually from flights, from Dubai or from China and Wuhan. The poor people used to call it the disease of the rich because it came on flights. But the lockdown, which was supposed to be a solution, was very brutal. It was announced at 8 p.m. for a midnight lockdown. And millions to start marching, and that's the image that stays in my mind about what the COVID has meant. More than 200 million people have lost their livelihoods. And in a country of fragile livelihoods, of precarious livelihoods, not having a day's work means starvation. Now, of course, in spite of the lockdown, we are second in the number of infections. So if, as a scientist, I say, if this recipe didn't work, we should be looking more carefully at what is it that we need to be doing.
The situation you described sounds irreversible. And as you've mentioned, the pandemic has brought to our attention the fragility of our current systems. So do you think that we'll be able to return to normal, much like the pre-COVID-19 era?
I don't think it is desirable to return to the old normal. And I don't think it's possible either. The reason it's not desirable is that old normal based on globalization, heavy industrialism, heavy use of fossil fuels and energy, and excessive unnecessary mobility, because everyone was bored in their job and was running away for holidays all over the place, rather than staying home and celebrating their culture, their community, as our ancestors used to do. That gave us climate change. It gave us the pandemic. It is so clear that this globalized system is the reason for invasions into forests. And the invasions into forests are the primary reason for new infectious diseases, like the corona, the SARS, the MERS, the Ebolas, the Zikas, the list carries on. And the United Nations has admitted that when we look just at the pandemic, we are looking at symptoms. When the cause is our invading into ecological spaces, we should leave for indigenous cultures and other species who are part of our family. But we also know that this globalized system of the last 30 years of globalization has forced everyone to use hyper-processed packaged food. So the plastic mountains have grown. The chronic diseases, the cancers, the obesity, the diabetes, the neurological problems have exploded. And when the pandemic combines with chronic diseases, it becomes a very major reason for mortality. As is being admitted, most people are dying of comorbidity, not of the infection itself. So we don't want to go back to that normal. But the point is, which future normal do we choose? Do we allow it to be an acceleration of the same mechanical mind, greed-based economy, not respecting limits, not respecting justice, not respecting human rights, and definitely violating the rights of the earth? Or we go to a normal, which I try and dedicate my life to, where we make peace with the earth, where everyone has meaningful work taking care of the earth, where every child has nourishment and food. Every child recognizes they belong to a culture, which is the culture of the earth.
So in conjunction with the pandemic, the world has witnessed the escalation of the chronic climate crises, as you've mentioned. And the recent irregular monsoon activities have increased awareness of climate crises in South Korea. How should Korean civil society activists respond to global crises such as climate change?
If you look at climate change, a lot of people have got just stuck with thinking of the amount of emissions in the air. But those emissions begin on the ground. All greenhouse gas emissions that are leading to the creation of a greenhouse being created around the earth so that the temperature gets blocked and we become like a greenhouse, and then the earth's climate systems start to get disrupted. We need to look at what do we do to the earth? What do we do to the ground? So in 2009, I realized the food, land use, agriculture was being totally neglected. And everyone was just looking at emissions from energy sources. So I did a book then called Soil Not Oil. And my research has shown that 50% of all greenhouse gases come from an industrial globalized agriculture. It uses fossil fuels to make chemical fertilizers of the kind that was stored in the Beirut warehouse and blew up and killed 200 people. And Beirut has been devastated by that blast. But that fertilizer is destroying the soil, it's destroying our waters and creating dead zones. And it is leading to a greenhouse gas, which is 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide. But about 15 to 18% of emissions are coming from invading into the Amazon, burning the Amazon to grow GMO soya, to force feed animals. I remember Korea had this big protest against the import of hormone-laden beef from America. And 25 years ago, you used to have on your restaurants, this is Korean beef, because it was safer than the American beef. And that invasion into forests is the reason for pandemic, but it's also 18% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And then because of this long distance transport, instead of eating fresh, eating local, we are packaging and processing and ultra processing, and the e-commerce giants have just exploded in their wealth. From what I see, Jeff Bezos and Amazon has increased 74 billion during this lockdown. Well, that packaging and processing also creates bad food, but it gives us 20% emissions. And then because you're basing it all on uniformity rather than diversity, local systems are diverse, local systems are healthy. We now have 4% waste. Add it all together, it's 50%. But ecologically, what this has done is made us forget that the earth is a self-organized living planet. And this self-organized living planet, like everything else, has limits. And these are called planetary boundaries. So when you rupture the planetary boundaries, and if you look at the planetary boundaries that are being ruptured, it's species extinction. Why are species going extinct? Because you're spraying poisons, you're spraying glyphosate and Roundup and pesticides that are driving species to extinction. And they began with the extinction of people in the concentration camps of Hitler. We shouldn't forget their roots. Rachel Carson reminds us about this. In addition to that, what we have is a rupture of the nitrogen boundary. So the climate debate needs to come home, and it needs to show the guidance of how we connect the debate of extinction of species, pandemics and diseases, climate disasters, the hurricanes of Korea, the fires of California, the floods in my country, and the issues of people having a good life. All this is interconnected, and all this is connected to the fact that we thought we were masters who didn't have to respect any limit, and we could conquer nature. But members of the Earth family cannot be her masters. We have to respect her laws, her limits, her systems.
So you've identified the flaws in the system that undergirds our current reality and how it is responsible for the crises that we are facing. And many people are demanding and advocating for change and social restructuring in the post-COVID-19 era. So what changes with regards to capitalism, democracy, and globalization would you recommend?
There are changes anyway happening. Many changes we have no idea. I happen to be working in these fields. I'm trained in quantum theory, but I've been looking at agriculture because of the disasters an industrial globalized food system has created. And I have walked with Korean farmers in Cancun. I brought them into 1993 to Bangalore for a big rally to say food is too precious to our health to be put into a globalized system. It's not a commodity. Food is life. Today, we are recognizing that. So the big transitions we need is to reclaim our seeds, our knowledge, our cultures, our food. But sadly, there is a change being made, unfortunately by the billionaires who got so addicted to making money at any cost, not respecting nature, not respecting democracy, not respecting the health of the planet or people. They now want to push fake food, Impossible Burger, patenting, Beyond Meat. If you look at the literature, they're talking about, oh, here's a wonderful investment. We can make lots of money. Well, that's what they wanted to do with seed. 33 years ago, they announced that now we'll own the seed. We'll genetically engineer the seed so we can collect the royalties from the patenting. And so I dedicated my life to saving the seed. I dedicated my life to writing laws that seed is not a human invention. Seed is evolution, and we have to co-create with it, not mutilate it. 25 years have led to failure of GMOs. Now they're trying new GMOs. So there's a change trying to replicate the logic, the values, the greed, the irresponsibility for the earth and society of the system that brought us to this crisis. But the change we need is a change from greed to living economic democracies, where people participate in shaping how we use the resources of the earth, how we create livelihood, and how we make our decisions. We have to shift from what has become an extractive system, extracting the wealth of people, extracting the land from peasants, extracting the forest from the indigenous people of the Amazon. And this is why all the wealth is sitting on the top. And I've written a book called Oneness versus the 1% about this inverted pyramid that can topple at any time. We have to shift from extractive economies to economies of giving, of circular economies. These local living economies are based on giving, on sharing, on regeneration, rather than collapse. That's the choice we face. We face an existential choice of, will we as a human species join the 200 other species that go to extinction every day because of the actions of a small minority of humanity? Or will we protect other species, protect the climate, protect the future, and through it reclaim our freedom? This is our work over the next decade, because that's all we have, one window to make true change for life on Earth.
So just to follow up, what concrete steps can we take to make the transition from our current reality to what you've described, which is more local and more closer to nature?
So my journey over these last 35 years has shown me that we have to begin with the food we eat, which is what we become. Mm-hmm. The food we eat makes us sick or it makes us healthy. We are not separate, isolated atoms in a divided universe. We are interconnected into beings. And we as the human body are walking microbes. We have 100 trillion microbes in our gut. And food makes a difference to those microbes. They therefore create our health, make healthy brains, make healthy body, make healthy blood. And food is the place where we start. And for the last 35 years, I have dedicated myself to working on a food system, doing research on a food system, working with millions of farmers to create a food system that's healthy for the planet, regenerates the soil, regenerates biodiversity, regenerates our water systems, regenerates democracy. And I'm so happy to say that after these 35 years, we find we can grow 2 times the food that India needs if we conserve biodiversity. Our farmers can earn 10 times more if they work in the local economy with sovereignty rather than chasing the global commodity market. and supplying through Amazon and Walmart. Food is us. Food is the beginning of change. Good eating is the revolution of our times.
So on that note, we will wrap up this conversation unless you have some final thoughts you'd like to share.
I would like to send my love to the people of Korea.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the Seoul SNPO Center and the Korean Civil Society, thank you for your time and your tireless activism. We wish you health and happiness as well, and hopefully we can meet in the future in the flesh.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.